record. So this is a small group, and we have the students that had enrolled in the night section that technically was going to get canceled, but we couldn't really cancel it because they needed it. So I get to record everything and then post it for them. So there's actually 3 other people that are just invisible that are in this class too. So the class is really like 12 people, but we've got a handful of invisible people. So lucky for you too, though, what that means is that because I have to record this, I will have everything recorded. I will also post it in your class so that, and I've done it in the past too, regardless, because I find that there's so much that we do in 2 hours that it's hard to retain all of it. So the video helps to go back to if you need to rewatch something or you missed a little piece of it or whatever it was. It'll all be recorded. So I'll post it in both classes. So after, well, I have another class right after this, but after that class, I will get it uploaded to YouTube so that it can be linked into those classes. So you'll have access to it. But that also means I'm slightly confined to this general area so that the microphone picks up my voice, even though I talk fairly loud half the time. I got to make sure it can pick up my voice. So I might end up just being right in this general area, which I can't stand because the computer blocks everything, and the computers already block you even when I'm standing, so then I feel like I'm talking to a wall. So we'll make it work. It's all good. But this is digital editing, so you've done Photoshop. Now, how long ago did you do Photoshop class? That's going to be my question. Was it last semester?
Last semester I had it.
Last semester?
Yeah.
How many years? Yours has been a little bit, hasn't it? It has.
It's been, I think, almost a year because I took breaks.
Yes, and you didn't have a full class load either, did you?
No.
Yeah,
No.
I was going to say, so you've got a little gap.
This is actually the first semester that's like a full class.
Is it? Oh, man. And yours was last semester, right?
Yeah, in spring.
Okay. Did you guys have yours last semester? Or was that like a year?
A year.
A year? Okay. And then yours was last semester. Okay, so some of the stuff will be pretty fresh. If you had it a year ago, there has been a few new additional things that were added, but they're things that we'll kind of touch on even early on, but as we go forward too, with some new features. Toward the end of last semester, there was an upgrade that introduced the selection feature that is a life-saving button. And it basically finds the subject in your photo and selects it for you. And it's the most glorious button in the entire world. So when we do different things, they'll select it. But the plan in this class is to go through, well, the book. We have, is your book purple still? Or did they not give me a new book?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, it is. Oh wait, yours is slightly different. What does yours say? 20? Yours says 2016. Oh, yours just looks darker than mine. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
So yeah, it is the 2016 edition. So it is a version, maybe like a version and a half old, but there's not a whole lot from what we do here that had changed in the new one. So we haven't switched because it just didn't pay to constantly switch. The book is outdated by the time we get it, regardless of what edition we have, because they've done some upgrade. So it's really hard from a text point standpoint to decide when to upgrade because they're constantly doing stuff. But it is the Photoshop CC for photographers. The 2016 edition is the one that we'll use. And there's a chapter or two that we don't necessarily go through, but it's not as bad as it seems based on how thick it is. Chapter 2 is the biggest piece. I mean, it's well over 100 pages. I think it's close to like 150 pages potentially. It's a huge chapter, but it's camera raw, so it's massive. And camera raw is such a huge piece of what we do throughout the semester. So, I will pick. I already have picked the pieces of the chapters that we'll read. There are some chapters you'll read the whole thing. There are some that we won't. Like chapter 2 because of how massive it is. But I would say all except for, is it chapter 10 that does print? Yes. All except for chapter 10, we'll cover a good chunk of the book. I mean, we'll touch in every chapter, even if we don't read the entire chapter. But what's cool is that this is very specific to photography now. So you have the general information from Photoshop Fundamentals. Now we're very specific to just things revolving around editing with your photography. So to kind of give you a rundown of everything that we'll cover, if I can get this open, to basically give you the idea here, we're going to do, my goal is to try and get things as automated as possible or speed up some of your processes. So one or two things we may touch back on that maybe you did do in Photoshop Fundamentals, but let's see if we can speed that up a bit, or there's some new features, or there's an advanced way of doing it. We really just want to take that all to the next level. Your time is definitely money, no matter whether you've realized that yet or not. If you get to the point where you're editing things for somebody or a client or whatever it is, you're like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this for 2 hours already. Like, are you getting paid for that 2 hours? I mean, that's all done in another class, figuring out what you should be charging and that kind of stuff. However, the faster you can get it done, regardless of what you charge and what your average time is that you figure your cost out, the faster you get it done, the more money you make. So if we can automate that stuff, let's do that. So we'll do things like presets, and we'll create some presets that make it a lot easier. Even if it saves 2 seconds, 2 seconds times 100 photos is a chunk of time. If we can use any type of automation, using actions is an amazingly huge tool that everybody should be using. So we'll hit on actions. We'll find different ways of doing retouching, whether it's a landscape image, whether it's a portrait image. There's some advanced skills for retouching that make taking out a power line super quick. So we'll go through all of that stuff and just really getting you to the point where you're finding different ways of doing it. Of course, there's like 7 ways to do the same thing as there is in any piece of software. So I'll try and show you, here's 3 different ways to do that, and then just figure out which one works best for you. That's my goal. But we will use RAW quite a bit. And that's why it's so early in the book, because it ties into everything we do throughout the semester.
I'm kind of fresh with my camera, so what RAW is compared to like a regular image, or is that?
Your RAW is completely unprocessed. So your camera touches nothing in your RAW image. A JPEG, when you take it with your camera compresses it. So it says, I don't need this information, I don't need this, and it takes that out. So your editing capabilities are a little bit limited. I shouldn't say they're limited, it's just you don't have all the data to have as high of a quality edit.
Do you set it up in
versus
like settings on the camera
Yep.
to take like RAW?
Yep, right in the format.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So you just switch that there.
Okay.
So yeah, so we'll do all of that stuff throughout the semester. But cool thing is you guys know all of this stuff, so I don't have to go through all of that. But we will have several projects and things like that. Most of your stuff we'll have every week based on what we're talking about. There'll be some type of assignment to tie to it. Most of them are just a 1-week deal where they're going to be due the next week. There's a few things that might go a couple of weeks. But another thing is, and you'll have a love-hate relationship with it, maybe you'll hate me more, but with each chapter that we read, I want to just understand what you got from it. So I have everyone doing just a short little chapter summary with each chapter that we read. And it just comes from, what did you grasp? What did you get from it? Are there new techniques? How would you integrate that or not, or find it completely useless for what you do? And then if there's anything that's completely unclear yet. We only have 2 hours in this class. So we want to make sure we cover as much ground, but then the things outside of class you're doing, that we're still answering those questions and things that are unclear. And that reminds me, up here. This class too, because we only have 2 hours in class, it's actually a 4-hour class, but it is a flex lab class. So we only have a 2-hour, like a demonstration, lecture-ish type of a deal where we're playing around in Photoshop together and understanding the topic. And then the other 2 hours is a lab time. So if you haven't had a class with a flex lab, you may have with Photoshop. Very much the same. We just have separate flex lab for photography versus what design graphics has for Photoshop fundamentals. So we have 2 sections. I'm actually going to march upstairs this afternoon and ask if that's correct, because I think we should have 3, because there's 3 class sections that have flex labs and we only have 2 times. So I think that's wrong. So I'm going to see if that is incorrect and see if we can get a couple more hours added on there to give at least a little bit more time for people to be able to get in. But the cool thing about flex labs is that you could technically only have 2 hours of lab for a class, but if you need more time or later on in the week you're working on it and you're like, oh man, I don't get this, you're not restricted to a lab right after our demonstration period. You've got time throughout the week. So if you've got questions later on in the week, we'll come to the, well, it's Thursday now, but come to the Monday flex lab during the day and get those questions answered before it's due on Thursday, or the Wednesday night flex lab. So we have a day and a night. Like I said, I'll see if we should be having one more because that doesn't calculate right to me. But Mondays, there is a 10:30 to 12:20, and that's in this room, and I will be here for that one. On Wednesday night is a flex lab right after the digital workflow class, and Alexis will be doing that one, and that will be in BT 250. So 250 is on the IT side of our building. So if you take our hallway right out here, my left, your right, I guess depending on where you're sitting, to my left, if you go out the hallway and follow the hallway wiggles and go all the way down to the other side, 250 is down there in that little corner. There's 2 Mac labs over there. The web program is on that side, so that's where that lab is. So Alexis will actually be going from here, from this room, down to that room because there's another class in here right after hers. So if she's not there right at 7:30, she's probably trying to get out of here so she can get down there and get that room unlocked too. So utilize those 2 times for as much or as little as you need. You don't have to come to those labs, but if you find that you're having questions and things like that, you should be going to those labs. It's very hard to answer questions related to Photoshop by email. So coming to those labs are great. The one thing I'll tell you about this Monday Flex Lab is I will be doing it via Collaborate, so web conferencing. So especially if you're driving from a ways, like I know, Melissa, you live like in Door County.
Right.
So if you have just a quick question, it's like, oh my gosh, am I really going to drive the hour to come here and ask a 10-minute question? You can do that through web conference. So
You said Mondays?
Mondays.
Are we doing the web conference one?
Yes.
Okay.
So that you can tune in that way. So I will have it open on this computer, and then regardless of whether I'm helping somebody or whatever in the room, it'll be open. It dings when someone joins so that I know someone's there, but you can always yell like through the microphone or type and chat or whatever it is. You just need to have a decent connection from your house. Has anyone done web conferencing before? I can't remember if any of you were in the other class. I did it in workflow, and I don't think any of you guys are in there. Has anyone done the web conference? You did it yesterday, right, Dakota? Yeah, you did.
Yeah, I did yesterday.
You did. Oh yeah, you were in there,
I
weren't
was
you?
in yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah.
You guys all have access to the whatchamacallit, the photo opportunities.
You said you had to add us manually, individually.
I think you're in there, Melissa. I'm pretty sure. Let me just double check here. There's only a few of you, so this is much quicker. Let's go to the end, because you're at the end. Yep, you're in there.
Yep.
And then, let's see. Oh, Dakota, you're not in there.
And it's under the photo opportunities?
Yes.
under the Organizations?
Yes, it is. Okay. Johnson, right, Dakota?
Huh?
Johnson? Your last name?
No, but I saw myself up there.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I thinking Johnson? What's wrong with my brain? Okay, but you're in there. Okay, but everyone else should be in there. I believe, Riley, you should be in there.
I saw my name.
Okay. And I know Gabriel's in there, and I know Natasha and them are in there. Okay, so we're good. So if you want to try this out, if you haven't done it yet, try it out because it's super easy. I think people are afraid to do it. They're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. But if you want to try this out, the only thing I want you to do is just turn the volume down on your computer before you join the room. Otherwise, we'll get feedback because we're in the same room. And so it's awful. So just make sure that the volume is down on your computer. But if you go to the Photo Opportunities organization, and you will see a FlexLab Collaborate button at the bottom. Yours will look a little bit different than mine, not much. But you'll see that it has a course room and it's unlocked. And it allows you to click on that course room. I have to do it a little different. But it'll give you two options. It'll give you one to dial in, so you could just dial in on your phone if you wanted to, and chat or whatever. It's basically like FaceTiming. It's just through Blackboard Collaborate. Or you click Join Room on a computer. So if you click Join Room, it will add you in to the classroom. So this is what you would do from home. You would just click on that, and then it adds you into the room, and then you'll see as people add themselves in there, you'll see multiple screens show up. But what's really cool about this is that when you're in there, you can enable the microphone or the video. And let me see if I can get that to work yesterday. See, what is up with that? I gotta figure out why that's acting like that, because it's allowing it. It's to be reloaded. This page may be reloaded for the new settings. It's okay. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out why it's giving me this, but you should, with that enabled, be seeing me. What's cool is that you can from home share your screen with me, and I can share my screen with you, so that if you're having a problem in Photoshop, if we just share your screen, I can look at it, and then we can probably figure out that problem. I did that last semester with several students. It was outside of a flex lab, but we just couldn't figure out what the issue was. And we were chatting. I don't remember what we were chatting in, email or something, and we couldn't figure it out. So we did it this way, and then we were able to share her screen. She was at work. We were able to share her screen, and then we got it figured out. So you can chat through audio by turning that on. You can type. There's a little flyout menu on the bottom right, and you can type and ask your questions. And it works. But then there's the ability, there's a share content button in there, and there's the ability to share your screen. So you would have these capabilities too. So by doing that, I can do entire screen. And as soon as it starts sharing, it's going to go into an abyss. But if anyone else were in there right now, you would be able to see that. It's just I'm the only one in here, so. But that's basically how that would work. So use that. So for FlexLab, just that day one, use that. If you have any problems with anything, maybe it's just a quick thing, whatever, that you need clarification on, I will have that open for all of my FlexLabs on Mondays. But that's how that works. But you do have to go to the Photo Opportunities organization just because there's 3 different classes that use FlexLab. That way anybody can get into that to ask questions. Otherwise I'd have to have 3 class sections open with a different web conference for each one. So this allows anyone to get in there. So that's why it's in there. So use that if needed. FlexLabs are definitely beneficial to everyone. Anyone that has ever come to a Flex Lab or just looking through success of students in previous classes, those that came to Flex Labs, whether they needed help or just needed to be reassured that there was an instructor there to answer questions, they all did better in their classes by attending those labs. So definitely take advantage of them because you buy yourself extra time if needed. So as far as what we're doing, it's pretty well laid out. Like I said, we go through a good chunk of the book, and for the most part, we go in order. We don't do 8 was the other one. I knew there was another chapter. And 6, oh wait, I lied. There was more than one chapter. I forgot that I rearranged that because 6, I believe, was like an HDR chapter. Yep. Chapter 6 was HDR, and you guys do that in landscape, so we're not going to duplicate. I worked really hard over the summer to try and find all the duplications in classes and take them out. So I found HDR in 3, and depending on the instructor, 4 classes. So it doesn't need to be in this one. You need to go out and photograph the images a certain way in order to put an HDR image together. So it resides in landscape and nature now. So we don't do that chapter. Chapter 8 is, I could have sworn I had chapter 8 in here, but, oh no, it is. It's up here. I'm like, I knew I had it in here. We do chapter 8 a little bit sooner because it talks about layer and masking, and I thought, well, that's weird. Why is it an 8 and not at the beginning? Not that you guys don't know layers and masking, but it has some advanced things that we talk about. So we pull portions of that chapter. But then 10 talks about printing, so we don't do that chapter either. But yeah, other than chapter 8, we pretty much go in order with the chapters that we are going to read. I know some people hate it when I go out of order with chapters, but 8 just didn't make sense where it was. So you'll see the chapter that we're covering that particular week. You will see in Blackboard, if I can get into the right section again, you will see, it will tell you in each weekly folder, it will tell you what chapter to read and then what pages from that chapter, especially the bigger ones where we probably aren't reading the entire chapter. I outlined just the pages to go through. You can obviously go through more than that, but you know, you all tell me you read that stuff and it's probably questionable to begin with, so.
So you said to read just the certain pages that, but you can read more if you want to?
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to. I just pulled out the stuff. Yeah, these are the ones that I definitely want you to go through, like for chapter 1, for example. And some chapters are pretty small and pretty easy to read, so I have you read the whole thing like towards the end, like 9 and 11. 11 is probably a whopping 10 pages. I don't know, it's tiny. So some of the chapters are small, so you will read through all of it. But there's a lot of visuals. I mean, you're going to find, more pictures than there's words on a page. So it's never as bad as it seems. As my foot is caught, there we go. It's never as bad as it seems, but the visuals are nice too because he usually explains in the figure captions and stuff what's going on with each of those pictures, even put some of the settings in there. So it's a really good reference book, but I pull the most important things for what we're covering. Or in some cases, it's things that we can't cover in class, but it's very easy to understand by reading the text. So I'll have you read those parts outside and just cover what is a little bit more difficult to understand, and we demonstrate that in class. So, but with that too, what you'll see is that you have the assignment to read, but then you also have the chapter summary. So the chapter summary, I put the link in each folder, but I also have a chapter summaries link on the left-hand side. So right below class materials, you will see chapter summaries. Maybe. Why not? They're supposed to be there. All right. Let's figure out why that's not working. I'll make sure that they're in there, but they're all in the template. Wow, that template didn't copy over the right way. That's frustrating. They're not there. All right, I will figure out why they're not there. They're supposed to be there. Let me go into last semester and you can see what it's supposed to look like, and then I'll copy it from there later. Portfolio, editing, right there. See, you're supposed to see all of this. This is what you're supposed to see. I will copy it from here into there. I don't understand why it's not there. But you will see a list of all the chapter summaries, and they're done as a blog post, so it's not like a blog post. I don't know. I didn't want to do it as a discussion board because it's not a discussion. It's what you learned from the chapter. So nobody can see these posts that you put. Only you and I can see it. So you can just reflect however you need to within each chapter. But it acts like a discussion board. So when you go in there, you would create a blog entry. And again, yours is a little bit different than mine. Here, let me go to student preview. This will be easier. There we go. So when you guys go in there, I guess it does look the same. You can create a blog entry, and then it's typing like you would type anything in Blackboard. So you'll just type, and I'll show you the requirements in a second, but you'll just type right in there, and then you just post it, and that's it. So don't forget to do these, though. After the first couple, people start to forget about these. These are each worth 10 points, and that can have a huge impact on your grade by forgetting those. That immediately could easily drop you from your A to close to a C at that point by missing these, because they're each 10 points. And we have, I believe, 9 of them. Let me exit this. Get out of here. So do not forget to do these. I will keep reminding you. But there's always a chunk of people that forget to do these as the semester goes on. But I do have, you'll see right in the class materials folder, the rubric for your chapter summaries. So you will see it's just 10 points where you are explaining. It's really going to be just a couple of paragraphs is what it's going to be. This is nothing too lengthy. You're not writing like a paper every single week. You're just going to explain, kind of go through at least two tasks, topics, whatever it is that you learned from reading that chapter. There's going to be a couple of chapters, especially this first one, where it's probably going to be more review. I would say 1 and 8 are probably going to be the chapters where you're like, I knew that, but there's this one little piece that I didn't know. So what you learned in those chapters might be smaller than other chapters, and that's okay. You can certainly say, well, I knew a lot of this, but it reminded me, because I forgot this existed type of a deal is probably what will happen. So just explaining those two things that you learned from that chapter. This is the one that people forget the most. How do you find benefit in them, or how do you think you could use them as part of your editing process? Or maybe how you won't use it as your editing process. There'll be a couple of chapters like, this doesn't pertain to me. That's okay. Maybe there's a way to work it in and maybe there's not. But don't forget that part of it. A lot of people forget that one. And then if there's anything that's unclear, maybe it's something, it could more so related to what you read here, but if everything here is okay, but there was something in class we discussed that you're like, I still don't get that, put that in there too. And then obviously make sure that you're making sentences out of everything. So every chapter summary will be those 10 points. But the rubric is there at any time. If you're forgetting what you have to put in there, it's right there. And then right in the chapter summaries, you can either go to that tab or right through the weekly folder. I link it in there too. So there's no guessing as to how to get to it. But you'll see those outlined here. And then, it's pretty straightforward. There's a couple of projects that we do. There's one big project at the end of the semester. It's an editing project and presentation where you kind of take some of the things we talk about throughout the semester, but also think about something very particular to your editing that either you struggle with or you have to find a better way of doing it. Someone had selected, I always have to extend my backgrounds. They're not wide enough when I use backgrounds, so it's very frustrating. So they researched a couple different techniques that made extending backgrounds a lot quicker for them. And that's what they presented on. So we'll walk through that. I have all the information, and I'll give that to you guys fairly early, probably right around midterm, just after is when you'll get that information. And then you have until the end of the semester to put that stuff together. So it's just, I'll explain that as we get closer. But yeah, I mean, other than that, it's, I don't know, it's pretty straightforward. So I don't know, do any of you guys have questions on anything? Okay. And I told the students that are doing this independent study through the recording that if they needed to come in to any class and they were available to come during the day, to please come. Otherwise they'll just do it through the recording. So we may have, just random people showing up some weeks, who knows? So, but some are strictly at night, so that's why they couldn't come to this one. Okay, let me turn this off. Maybe I'll click and maybe it will work. There we go. So one bit of information as we kind of begin. In digital editing, because there's so much information, like I will just throw information at you for 2 hours every week because there's so much to give you. I had a very hard time going from a 4-hour class to a 2-hour class because it often took me almost 3 hours sometimes for us to go through demonstrations. So because we have so much to cover, I want to give you advice. These are strict quotes straight from students that took it in the past. I updated it from last semester with the feedback they gave me too. So this is all from last semester and the semester before. This is their advice. This is my advice, obviously. You want to submit your layered work. We're working in Photoshop. I would say 95% of the time you are submitting layered files to me. So please don't submit JPEGs. If you're submitting a raw file, when we talk about that stuff, make sure that you have the XMP file to go with it, or that it's a DNG so that I can see the edits. Complete your chapter summaries, use your FlexLab, and then obviously just being patient with yourself because it takes a lot of playing. So what other people told me, direct quotes from the little feedback thing that I get from them at the end of the semester, and you guys will do this too so that I can give your advice to future semesters. But one person said that Photoshop takes a lot of practice at first, but with the practice you'll learn more and become better at it, and that we'll do hopefully a good job in this class of that. Taking notes. Someone says, do not miss class or a recording. Take lots of notes. Ask lots of questions. There's so much information to retain, it's going to be impossible to remember it all. That's the other reason why I recorded it, so you could go back, because you can't write and click on the computer at the same time. So don't worry. You're good. More notes stuff. Take vigorous notes and go to class. They missed one class. They said it was rough, but with the recorded sessions, it helped a lot. Notes help in the future. There are some things we do in the future that any written notes that you have you can use if we can't use a book for something. So having notes is good. And that whole, I don't know, there's some weird study about it. No matter how you take notes, handwritten notes will always stick with you more because there's something about writing it that helps your brain remember it more. So I don't know. I find weird studies like that interesting, so I read it all the time. But handwriting notes is better than typing notes because your brain retains it longer. And we're visual people, so if you're like me, I know exactly where I take notes on a certain page. So if I have to go back to a note, I'm like, I know it's on the upper left corner of whatever page I wrote it on. So it's part of having a photographic memory. FlexLab. Someone said their FlexLab was critical to practicing what they learned in class, but get the help that you needed. It's helpful to have the photos you are going to work on or a pool of choices before going into lab so that you can maximize the time that you have in the lab. So all they're saying is decide on your images before you come into lab. because then you won't waste any time looking for pictures and then have like 20 minutes to work on it. I'm telling you, these are direct quotes. Read the freaking textbook. Do the assignments as soon as you can. Don't procrastinate. So, verbatim from somebody else. Organizing your files is incredibly important. Timeliness, do your work on time. If you're having issues, discuss them with Jessica. Label everything. Stay organized. Don't be afraid to try out different things. Take the tutorials and modify them to suit your style and label stuff. I will hound you for labeling your layers. Playing around. Someone said I would tell future students to make sure to give themselves plenty of time to work in the different editing mediums. Best way to learn and use Photoshop, Raw, Bridge, whatever, is to have time to play around with the tools. By doing this, you really learn which tools and settings will be useful for your own editing. I would always also recommend that they read the book before class and bookmark and highlight the parts that they found confusing so that we can revisit it in class. So, there's your suggestions from everybody. I throw that out there. I found it helps. Okay. So let's play in Photoshop a little bit today. You doing okay so far? That's all the gibberish I have to give you from the start. Oh, I wonder if you guys have this that pops up. All right, you may or may not have images, and that's okay. We can pull just about anything to do what we want to do today. But I want to just get us started to refresh our memory for certain things. There's some things that are pretty obvious and straightforward from Photoshop fundamentals, but we can customize things a little bit more. Our first chapter is very much a review chapter, but I do enjoy, it's also called Photoshop Fundamentals, but what I do enjoy in this chapter is that it actually goes through every single tool and what every tool does. So for most of you, you've got it. But some of you, it might have extra tips. You're like, oh man, that clone stamp tool, I hate that tool. I love that tool, so I'm just saying that. But you might hate a certain tool, but maybe you breeze through certain parts and you're like, oh, wait, it does that. And then you find different ways of using it. So there's a lot of review stuff, but there's only a few parts that I want to pull out to show you guys. And some of this stuff we dive into a little bit more as we get into the chapters. Like there's a section with the brush tips and things like that. So we're going to do that as we start doing that kind of stuff, where we'll come back to some of those tools and look at really how we can use them, especially when we get to, and of course I just put it away, especially when we get toward retouching. We're going to use the Wacom tablets quite a bit. I would encourage you to start using them at any point. How many have used a Wacom tablet? No one. Yes, fresh meat. If you've never used a Wacom tablet, they're spectacular. We have a Wacom tablet for every computer in this room. So when we do that stuff, you might have to come in here and work. However, in the atrium, there are 3 Wacom tablets and 1 in the open lab. They're a little bit different because they're the monitor Wacom tablets, so they look like a second monitor, but they still act as a Wacom tablet. I have to double check that the driver was installed properly on those yet, but with the new upgrade to Sierra, there was a little bit of an issue with it, and they said they got it, but I want to double check that it's working properly. So those are out there, but otherwise we have an optical mouse. But I might throw these at you guys well before we start doing that kind of stuff, because there's just a slight learning curve to playing with the Wacom tablets, but they are a lot of fun to use. I have a lot of back problems, so when I sit in front of the computer, like my whole right shoulder is locked up because I've been working till 2 a.m. every day the last 2 weeks. So I'm sitting in front of my computer, so my shoulder's completely locked and it hurts. This allows me, especially being left-handed, to use this arm, but this allows me to sit away from my computer, and I don't use a mouse, I use my Wacom tablet. So instead of a mouse, I'm using a pen and I'm drawing, and it allows for better hand movement and you know, when we start doing things like retouching, we have the pressure sensitivity and things like that. So using it as a mouse, using it just as a drawing tool, whatever it may be, these are wonderful, wonderful things. So, and there's a couple different varieties. If as you play with them, you're like, oh, I could probably use one of those. The one I use at home was $79 on Amazon. So it's about the same working space. It just doesn't have all the fancy stuff on the side is really all it is, which is fine if I'm using it as a mouse. So we have a handful that we'll pull out, but if you want to play with those sooner than later, we'll bring them out. But when we get into some of those tools, we'll talk about it a little bit. But toward, let me find the pages here, at least so I can give you guys a reference. History panel, I'm coming back to that one. Where did it go? PDF. I want to get to the workspace. How many of you guys use Bridge? Do you use this Bridge? Okay. Bridge is a beautiful tool. We're going to use it. It marries well with Photoshop. It used to be a plugin in Photoshop before it came its own actual standalone software. So it's evolved quite a bit. It has a lot of power and a lot of shortcuts too. So I'll touch on it a little bit today. We'll use it a lot next week and even going forward, especially when we do stuff in RAW. So I'll come back to that. But I'm trying to find the workspace. I'm going to come back to this history tool because I know it's a tool you guys don't use and I want to show you. So I just want to show you a couple things within the basics that I think you could use. I just want to give you guys the page reference. Panels, icons. Here we go. We're getting closer here. You would think I would have memorized the page numbers by now. Customizing the menu options. Okay, so pretty much from page 21 out a few pages are some pages 21 to 27. There we go. These are good pages that talk about customizing your workspace. Now that you have basic knowledge of what the tools do and creating layers and all that stuff, I want you to be able to customize this as much as possible. So one of the things that Photoshop allows you to do is, and I'm going to close that for now, is you can move and open up whatever panels you want. If you go to the window menu, you will see workspace. And there are some pre-built workspaces in there. You probably have the default on, might be all you've used so far. I don't know. Has anyone customized a workspace before? Have you a little bit? Not really. You've probably just been working within the default, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But as you realize what you're doing in Photoshop, like I use this all the time, I don't use this, you're going to find that you want to hide things and show things and put them in certain places to make your life a little bit easier. So, this is the default setup. I don't use all these pieces and stuff I need is missing. So what you do is you customize this however you want. Hopefully you remember that in your window menu are all the different palettes that you can show and hide. So if you use text quite a bit, where's my text? Properties, paragraph, there we go, any day now. So if you're doing a lot with text, you might need the paragraph for alignment, you might need the character to select fonts, things like that. In the default, that's not showing. I use that all the time because I have to put a copyright or a watermark or something on my images. So I want that available. I don't use libraries. Not a lot. I shouldn't say I don't use them, but I don't use them a lot. So I might uncheck this to hide it because I don't use it that often. The stuff that I use a lot, I put in this column essentially. So my layers, my channels, my paths, I've got my properties, I've got my adjustments. but I like my adjustments to come before my properties, so I'm going to swap those tabs. I use my histogram quite a bit, so maybe I bring that one up, but it puts it over here. I don't like it over there, so I'm going to move my histogram here. So you have the ability, and I don't need the navigator, make that go away. You have the ability to show and hide things. I want this to go away completely. My info palette, you're going to discover the info palette's a beneficial thing. So I love my info palette. I need my info palette up at the same time I have my adjustments up when we start walking through like some color correction stuff and things like that. I need that stuff up at the same time. So once I have this laid out the way I want, I can adjust my tools if I want to. You know, I'm not going to use the rotate view. I just use the quick keys. I don't need that tool showing, but what I do need is, come on, show me. But what I do need are some of the extra tools that are hiding. Actually, no, they're all showing right now. Well, isn't that nice? By default, maybe I was in a different workspace setting that they were all hiding. But if in these extra tools down here, there are tools that you want that are hiding in there, or tools that you don't need and you want to clean this up a little bit, anything from, and let me back up here a second, in those, when you click on the three dots, you get edit toolbar or a list of all the tools that are hiding in there. If I click edit toolbar, it will bring up, here's everything in my toolbar right now, and here are all the extra ones that appear under the three dots. So I could get rid of stuff just to clean it up a little bit. Like when I click on the eyedropper tool, all these are hiding underneath. Well, I really only use the eyedropper, the color sample, and if I'm doing templates for albums, I'll use the ruler tool. But other than that, I don't use the note, I don't really use the count. So I could just move some of these out so that when I click on the drop-down menu, I only see what I really want. And if I need them, they're still there. They're just under the three dots. So customize this as much as you want. I mean, really just think about, what do I use? What do I not use? That kind of stuff. So if I hit done now, if I go here, now if I go here, I see all my extra tools there. But I also have, if I go under that eyedropper, hello, come on in. I also have only these tools available because I hid the rest of them. So I've customized everything. And just those few changes might be enough. I don't know. You're going to find stuff that works, stuff that doesn't work, and you're going to figure out what you want to use. But the trick is, when you are done, you want to save it. And I'm not going to show you how to save it yet because I want to show you one more way to customize. However, you can save this workspace so that all you have to do is go to that workspace menu, click on whatever you titled it, and then it just puts everything where you had it. So that way, when you come in and someone has screwed with your computer over the last week and all your palettes are in a different spot and you're like, man, I got to bring up the info palette again. It drives me nuts. So you can just click on that workspace and it will populate it. Now it's only on this computer, but there's a way to pull those out. And when we talk about presets, I'll show you how you can pull your workspace out and then take it and upload it to your workspace at home. So you can put it on any computer you're working on and make it a little bit more portable. So I won't throw that at you yet. However, no, I will tell you how to do that. So we can save that workspace. But before we do that, I want to show you one more level of customizing. I love doing this. Sometimes I hesitate telling people, but I think it's specific to just your login. So if we mess it up completely, the next person that comes, it shouldn't be messed up. But I don't know. We'll find out. Did you know you can create your own keyboard shortcuts? Who loves keyboard shortcuts as much as I do? I'm gonna push them like you wouldn't believe. What's the quick key for? I'm gonna be like, it's Command J, stop asking me. Your keyboard shortcuts. You will hate me for constantly telling you keyboard shortcuts and asking you keyboard shortcuts. But you need to know keyboard shortcuts. Half the time as I'm telling you stuff in class, I have no flipping clue what menu they're in because I only know the shortcut. And I have to go find it. And I'm like, oh, crud, what menu is it in now? So you'll probably see me doing that and think, does she really know Photoshop? I know the keyboard shortcut, but I don't know where it is in the menus anymore. So that is a very good problem to have. And you really should know your keyboard shortcuts because I can tell you that my workflow is way faster knowing them. And even just working with other people in industry, if you're not using them, they're like, oh my gosh, would you catch up? Seriously. Even my sister did that because both her and I were designers to start with. She still is a designer, and she worked with somebody right after they graduated. They had hired an intern from here to work at the print shop she worked at. And she's like, oh my gosh. She's like, I'm just sitting there going, just push the keyboard. And they're trying to click on the menu and stuff. And it's like taking them twice as long to get stuff done. So when we talk time is money, your keyboard shortcuts are like money. And I'm not joking. So learn your keyboard shortcuts. I have a little sheet that I'll give you that you can just start writing them as you find them so that you have them as a reference. But your keyboard shortcuts, there are some things in here that you might use often that don't have a keyboard shortcut. Let me open a file here. What is this? Ooh, PSD, composite. Let's just use this. So if you have a document, here's a document with a bunch of layers. And when I go to print this, I obviously need a flattened image to print it. So you have to go layer and flatten image. Well, that takes too much time. That's going into a menu. I want to push a button and it does it for me. So there is no keyboard shortcut for that. However, I can create one. And I want to show you how to do that. I'm so used to having one that when I come here, I push the buttons on the keyboard and it doesn't work and I get angry. So I want to show you how to do this because you can do this at home. You can do this here. Once you do certain things at home, you'll want to be doing it here, so you'll create it, that kind of stuff. So under the edit menu, there are 3 different options toward the bottom. And honestly, it doesn't matter which one of these first 2 you choose because it takes you to the same place. But the toolbar will do your editing toolbar that we were just in. But then you have keyboard shortcuts and menus. So it doesn't matter which one you pick because there's a tab for the other one at the top here. But in these keyboard shortcuts, you can choose, it'll bring up your application menus across the top. But you have a drop down for your panel menus, your tools. So there are a couple of tools that don't have a keyboard shortcut. I don't find many people changing these. But the application menus tend to be the one where people want to use that a lot. Like if you do a Gaussian blur a lot, you might just want to attach a keyboard shortcut to it so that you can push a button and it brings it up. So I want to, in this instance, I want to be able to push one button and it flattens all my layers. So I can go it's under the layer menu, I know that. And then the only thing is I got to scroll really far down because there's a lot of fly out menus in the layer menu and they're all in here. Well, there's a couple. It's way at the bottom. I'm getting closer. Line, distribute, flatten. Here we go. Flatten image. There is no keyboard shortcut. What do you think I should use for flatten image? Pick something. Anything. What would be easy to remember for flatten image? Keep in mind, when we talk command keys, typically just pushing a letter is for a tool. And then anything in menus is often like a command, option, control, shift. Those are typically ones that we can use, and then it follows like a letter or a number or something like that. Anything? If you were to create one for flatten image, what would you do?
Option F.
Option F. Okay, so all you have to do when you want to create that quick key is you click on this blank space here over by shortcut, and then you actually push the buttons that you want it to be. So if I hit Option F, it says Option F is being used. Menu command, menu commands must include a command and or something else. Okay, so we can't do option. So what if we did Command Option F? Let's try that. There we go. So we could do Command Option F. That is a possibility. And then every time we hit Command Option F, it flattens the image. I don't even know what mine is anymore because I just push it on the keyboard. Maybe that is what I have. We'll leave it that way. So now, it's like when you type, someone asks you your phone number or a phone number, and you're like, I don't know, I just push the buttons. I don't know what the actual phone number is. You have to actually dial somebody's number to be able to tell them what it is. So if I hit OK, under here, now Option Command F is now the key for flatten. So if I push that, it flattens my image now. So it's a really quick, easy way to do stuff. So if I want to, in the under blur, if I use Gaussian blur quite a bit, I could attach a quick key to that too. So if I go to keyboard shortcuts, I can go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Maybe I want that one to be Command Option B. See, it'll tell you if it's being used, so it's being used by color balance. So maybe I could do Command Shift B. Okay, that one's being used too. Command Option Shift B. I want it to be B for blur, so it's easy. Maybe I could do G. Let's do Command Option G for Gaussian blur. No. Command Shift G. Command Option Shift G. There we go. Command Option Shift G. You'll have to contort your fingers, but you can do it. If you want that to be the letter, obviously. So Command Option Shift G will give me my Gaussian blur. So now I can click Command Option Shift G. There we go. And it will bring up my Gaussian blur so that I don't have to go filter, blur, Gaussian blur. It saves so much time. So once you have those set up, you'll be able to move a bit quicker. I love how funny I am. I didn't realize I was that hilarious. All right. Let me undo this because I know that's not my quick key, and I'll go to push it and it will make me mad. Go down to, oops, I'm in filter. Layer. Down at the end. No, it's not. I always use, there we go. No. I always use this. It's already in use for flatten image. I know, that's the one I'm changing. This is ridiculous. Okay, there we go. Now, the other thing I want to show you while I'm in here is the menu tab. This is pretty cool too. So in this tab, we have the option to show and hide menu items. So you know how long that filter list is? That filter list is so incredibly long. And there are things in there, I just don't use. There are things in there I know you don't use. I don't use the 3D often. I only use it when I want to play. I don't use it at all for photography. I might use it for other things, but this is not the instance where I would use that. So I could just click the eyeball and completely turn that off. It won't show up in my filter menu at all. The blur menu is pretty long too. There's shape blur, there's smart blur, there's surface blur. There's so many different ones. Yeah, there are times I need to use those. Some are more rare than others, so I probably don't want to turn it off. But for ease of going through the menu and finding it faster, instead of turning it off, I could color code it. So I could say, well, I use my Gaussian blur quite a bit. there's a color one. If you click on none, it'll drop it down. Maybe I color code it red. I often use a surface blur, sometimes for retouching. I might use a smart blur every once in a while. So maybe I'll just highlight those because those tend to be the ones that I use the most. Then when I go to the menu, oh, I'm on a curves here. Let me get on a layer that'll let me get there. Here we go. Now I'm outlined in red. So with this ability, you are customizing everything that you want to do. Color coding, hiding, showing that 3D is completely gone. You can really do whatever it is you want to do. But I would recommend going through all of that before you save your workspace. Because when you save your workspace, it saves all of that stuff. And if you have to change it after, yeah, you can change it. But what you'll have to do is, there's not like a update existing workspace type of a button as there is in like Lightroom does updates better than Photoshop does. In here, we can't. We would have to delete the workspace and then we would have to add a new one back in. So this existing one here, I would probably go to delete the existing one I have saved, and then, yes, I really do want to delete it. And then go under workspace and add the new workspace. So this is how you would save it. You go window, workspace, and then new workspace. And then I would title it whatever I want. So it will automatically do your panel locations. It will automatically do your toolbars and things like that. But you have to decide if you want it to include, or I'm sorry, not your toolbars. Your panel locations are automatic. But you would have to check if you want any or all of the remaining 3 things. Do you want it to save what you did with your tools and edited that space? Do you want your menu changes and your keyboard shortcut changes to be saved? And if that's the case, check all those and then hit save. And now it's hanging out up top. So if I come in and someone was doing painting, and this is a hot mess right now for what I want to do because I'm not painting, the toolbar's even changed completely. I can just go back under workspace, hit edit, and then all my stuff is back where it's supposed to be. And it's a happy, happy moment. And it only took a few seconds rather than clicking palettes on and off and rearranging. So huge time saver right there. So that's one thing that I would recommend, is creating your own workspace. I will ask if you remember how to create your own workspace later on, so hopefully you remember. Okay. What am I doing on time here today? Okay. Are there any tools that you guys have been using and you're like, I don't know if I'm using it correctly? Or maybe tools that are just frustrating to you that you're like, I should probably know how to do this better, or what this tool actually does, but I'm not sure. If you have any of those tools, let me know. We may be covering it later, but there may be some where I can show you some stuff now. Think about that for just a brief second.
I feel like the history brush is something that I kind of get.
I feel like you were planted in here because that's exactly one of the ones I wanted to show you.
I remember learning it and I remember thinking, I don't know how that works.
Did you learn it? Okay,
Whatever.
because some people don't learn that in Photoshop fundamentals, and sometimes it's just too overwhelming. Like you're like, I don't get it, and so you forget about it. But seriously, it's like you're planted in here. That's the one I wanted to point out for sure. The history brush is pretty spectacular. Let me get just a plain image. Oh, not new. Come on. I don't want new. I want to open. Give me a solid image here. I want one that I can, here, let's take that one. Okay, so let's say we are doing something in our image and we're like retouching some stuff. Zoom in a little bit. Okay, he's got these horribly chapped lips because he bites his lips all the time. Oh, I don't know how well you can see that. There you go. Now you can see it. It's horrible. It's awful. So I might go through and I might do some retouching as I create new layers. So I'm going to use my clone stamp tool a little bit. I might be able to use my, and I'm just pushing keys because I'm forgetting names right here. Spot healing. There we go. I push the J because that's the one I want. So I might be able to use a spot healing to do some of this, and I'm probably okay. But I'm going to get into points in my image where spot healing is not going to work too well. So I'm going to undo. I'm going to go back in history here for a second, and I'm going to undo some of that. Or maybe I should leave it, because this is one way to use the history brush. So maybe let me just use the spot healing brush and only the spot healing brush so that it's going to be interesting. There's a lot of pattern going on here. I know it's hard to see up there. If I get in too close, it looks horrible on my end. Ugh. These lips. What is wrong with this kid? I can say it about my own children. I wouldn't say that about someone else's kids. Okay, so I did that. That's bad. This is just not a good retouch. This is not the best tool to use for the entire correction of his lips. But if I get to a point and I'm like, okay, this is too patterned. This just doesn't look quite right. I got to go back a little bit. Your history palette only allows you to go back so far. Like at this point, I can't undo everything because I've used the spot healing brush so much. Your history palette only allows 30 undos, basically, is all you can do. So if you do more than 30 things and you have to go back to something, you can't really undo it. And especially if, now I created a blank layer to do what I just did, but if I didn't create a blank layer and I'm doing it on the background layer. Don't ever do that. If you're doing it on the background layer, that's just bad. This is horrible. If I do it on the background layer, I can't go back. Maybe I only want to go back and try and fix this, but if I go back here, oh, I did get a chunk of that. I guess I didn't quite have enough steps here. But I might have had too many steps where I can't undo this stuff. Or maybe I just want to undo this, but, you know, the rest of this is spectacular. Maybe I just want to undo that. So what this history brush allows me to do, it looks like a brush, but it has a little arrow. Can I zoom in? I can. It looks like a brush, but it just has a little arrow behind it. The quick key is Y for a history brush. It's not an easy one to remember. But what this brush allows me to do is, in my history palette, you'll see all these little boxes on the side here. And you'll see a snapshot of the original image when you opened it up at the top. And by default, that's where my history brush is hanging out. So if I leave it there, what that does is it allows me to, at this point in the image, brush back what was originally there. It's kind of like erasing almost. But it's awesome if you are maybe working on a flattened image or something like that. I can go in and I can brush back. Oh, I'm at 10%. Whoops. Last time I used this was for retouching. There we go. I can go in and I can brush back the parts. I'm like, yeah, this part I messed up. I probably should fix that and do that all over again. So I'm just painting back essentially the original image. So think of it like a regular brush, but it's painting back a portion of the image at a certain state in history. It's kind of a hard one to grasp. So I could at any point too say, well, I'm okay with where I am, but right about here, now I used a spot healing brush, so it's kind of a guessing game. But right here, I kind of screwed things up. Or I screwed things up after that point. So I want to go back to this state, and I want to be able to brush back certain parts right here at that point. But I still want to leave everything else I've done, because this part's fine. It's just this part that I messed up. So the history brush would allow me to paint it back. Oh, and I'm working at 100%. So now I can go back and maybe use the right tool. Let's use 30% to try and bring it back a little bit and do a little bit better job of smoothing that out, even though I would never retouch this at 200%. We're going to pretend for a moment that I'm doing it right. Yikes, that was scary. So that's the benefit of it. Now, this is taking it a bit beyond, so I'm going to come back to this at retouching. I might totally lose you here, but if you're to that point, this will make sense to you. The history brush can be used from a retouching standpoint, just as like a brush, but go beyond that. Like, it has full brush capabilities. If you look at what you can do up at the top here, it has all the capabilities of a regular brush, only it's painting back history. So what's kind of cool is when we retouch, and when we get to that point, we'll talk about, when we talk about the portrait part of retouching, we'll talk about how you want to often whiten the eyes or brighten the eyes. And there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but certain ways may flatten the shadows in the eyes versus other techniques where you want to keep the roundness in the eyes, but you still want to pop it just a little bit. So one thing you can do is you can use your history brush and you can play with the different blend modes. So screen blend mode always has a lightening effect in the end. So I could use screen in my history palette, go back to my original image here, and I could, in a screen blend mode with my brush, now is it going to do it because I'm on this layer? Yeah, that's the only thing. The history brush is a little touchy in some spots because it can't paint back history to a layer that didn't exist at that point. So I'm working on a layer that did not exist, or that has no pixels for this part of the image. So I can't, oh, it's working now. Why was it not working 2 seconds ago? It's always hit or miss. Why is it only doing flow screen 100%? Did I do something to that eye? No. Why is it only doing part of it? Will it do this part? No. That's weird. That's really weird. If I go back here, I bet it'll do it. See? It's strange. The only thing about the history brush that's a little weird is when you have layers, if I add a layer now and then I try and paint back a state of history when that layer didn't exist, it's probably not going to work because it didn't exist at that point in history. That's like going back in actual history and trying to create something that, like taking an iPhone back to 1886, like it's not going to work because none of that existed at that point. So you're never going to be able to charge your phone in 1886. So it's kind of the same way here. So my background layer existed at that point. So I can take my background layer and in a screen blend mode, all it's doing is it's painting the exact same color. It's painting the eye back on top of the eye, but using screen blend mode. So it's giving me a lightened result. So while 100%, I would never do 100%, but just to show you at least, I can paint back the whites in the eyes in a different blend mode so that I keep all the veins in the eyes, I keep the shadows in the eyes, even though it's way overdone. I would probably do this at 10%. There, oops, now I'm back on the retouch layer. There we go. So I would probably do that here. That's a little bit better. Maybe even the eyes right here because he's got the dark brown in his eyes. But that way, if I go back, you can see even just that little bit, it popped it, but it maintained everything. Instead of using a white brush, which was just wash it all out, this is allowing me to paint the exact same image back, but using a different blend mode, if that makes any sense. It's really cool for contouring like hair, face, stuff like that, shadows, highlights, and landscape images. If you're trying to accentuate the shadow parts of an image and maybe pop the highlights and just manually brush that stuff in, this kind of like dodging and burning, this is like a way to dodge and burn essentially, is what it is. So I could use that same technique if this wasn't blown out. I could brush this back on. I could turn this to a multiply blend mode, and I could darken these parts of his face if I really wanted to. And then maybe even up here too. I can't stand being this zoomed in. I gotta zoom out. Maybe if I really wanted him to look mad, I would just burn the eyebrows and the scowling face back in. But if I compare that before and after, it makes a big difference just doing that a little bit with the image. So there's a lot of ways to enhance it, but those are some of the ways that you can use it. So using it to brush back something that maybe was mistakenly done in an image that you can no longer undo. It would save you from redoing stuff by going all the way back in history, having to fix that and redo everything that you just got rid of. But then it also helps in areas like that where you can play with the blend mode. So the history brush is a powerful, powerful tool. Like I said, we'll use it when we retouch. We'll talk about that. But just kind of fixing mistakes is a beautiful, beautiful part. So let's see. Did anyone think of any other tool where they're like, oh, I don't get this tool? I want you to forget that the dodge and burn tools exist over time. There are so many better ways of doing dodging and burning without using the actual dodge and burn tools. I will show you when we get to that point. Oh, the other thing with the history, not the history brush, but since we were in the history palette, that I think you guys would find benefit in is if at any point you're like, okay, I like what I did here, I want to try something, but I want to be able to go back to this point. Do you know you can take snapshots in your history palette? No? Okay. So you can take a snapshot at the bottom of your history palette. Let me move this up here. There's a little camera icon right here. If you create a new snapshot, I could create this snapshot up at the top. You will see the original and a snapshot. So that if I do whatever it is I'm going to do, like if I run, are my actions still on here? Ooh, that's one thing I didn't put in my workspace. Crud. I'm going to have to redo that. Do I have it? I have summer. My quick keys are not here. Come on. Summer base action. I want to edit this. There it goes. Why are you not working? Shift F3. There we go. So I have an action that I want to run here. So if I go in, I'm going to first flatten my image. Oh, and I just remembered what my quick key was. I told you it's like a phone number when you push your fingers on the keyboard. You're like, oh yeah. Okay, layer. Because as I'm doing it now, it's going to bug me the rest of the semester if I don't fix it. There we go. I have Control Shift Command, not Option like I was doing before. There we go. So if I flatten my image first, if I run my action, this action takes a second. Come on. This action's running a bazillion things. So at this point, I am about to create probably 60 different steps to get to this point. This action just created all these layers and did all this stuff and all these adjustments and stuff like that, that in my history palette, I can't really go back to what I did before. Well, actually, it did pretty good. I wonder if this computer is set to have more history states. I potentially can't go back to do what I want to do. Less sunlight. There we go. Let's bring up. Yeah, let's just do a whole bunch of more steps that I would typically do. and see if I can't get this. There we go. If I look at that and I'm like, oh man, no, this isn't working, I can go to my history palette, click my snapshot, and automatically go back to that point without having to start all over if I can't undo those steps. Or I could use that also to now paint back at that point too, because those steps are all gone now. So snapshots are cool because now it's very easy to undo all of that and get back to that point. Or I could go here, create another snapshot. I could title this Summer Action, and I could title this Retouch if I wanted to. And I can actually go back and forth. So if I'm like, I don't know if I like that, I can go back and forth way quicker by doing snapshots. I think it's very underutilized. Even sometimes I forget to create snapshots when I'm doing stuff and go back, because I'm probably to the point where I've got everything fairly automated that it's like, just do it. Where I need snapshots when I'm playing. So snapshots are awesome when you're just playing. But when you get to the point where like I know exactly what I have to do, click, 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 onto the next image, you might not use it as much. But when you play, you will. You will find great benefit with it. Okay. All right. This is the point I want to be at. All right. So those are just a few things that I wanted to point out to you. The workspace was the biggest thing, trying to show you that. Now here's what I want to do next week. We're going to start playing in Raw. Raw is huge. If you're in workflow, if you've taken workflow, a lot of the things that Adobe's Camera Raw plugin does is very similar to Lightroom. But I show you these things, and you have to know how to operate with Camera Raw in Photoshop, because some of the things that we do throughout the rest of the semester, we have to go back to the raw image in Photoshop to be able to adjust. So I'm going to show you those, and a lot of that stuff, like I said, will be familiar to you if you've done workflow already, and that's a good thing. But Raw is such a humongous chapter. I mean, just that plugin, there's entire books written on just that plugin, because it's basically its own piece of software in itself. So we'll use Bridge and Camera Raw over the next 2 weeks pretty heavily. So next week when you come in, bring raw images with you. If you don't have any, I'll grab a handful you can use. I actually have the images used in the textbook for each chapter downloaded, so we can always grab those because there's some raw files in there too. They're just very small raw files, so we can't zoom in to do a lot to it, but those will be available. But if you have your own, that's definitely better. So look through the images that you have, or just grab a handful and bring them in. If you don't have raw and you want your own, flip your camera into a raw mode so that you can have raw, and take a few pictures so that you can have raw images to play with next week. But I want to see what point you are at in Photoshop. So this is what I want you to do for your assignment. It's kind of an interesting, click here. I gotta refresh this page so that it shows up. There you go. Why is it not showing in green? Oh, because it's a link. Shoot. Okay. So this is what I want you to do for next week. I want you to take a close-up of your eyeball, because that's not weird at all. I want you to take a close-up of your eye. I want you just to play around in Photoshop, do whatever it is that you would do to create this image. This is going to give me a good starting point to see like how you're using layers, how you're labeling things, how you're operating in the software, what your knowledge is playing with blend modes, that kind of stuff. Because they're things that we're going to use all the time. So what I want you to do is to create an image that showcases who you are literally through your eyes. So you're going to take a close-up of your eye, and then inside your eye, you are going to put other pictures that represent who you are, maybe who you are as a photographer, just who you are as a person, hobbies, things like that, things that are important to you, that kind of stuff. You can kind of take it in whatever direction that you want there. But you're going to take a photo of your eye. We can run in the studio and do that quickly because obviously taking your own picture is not going to happen. No, you can't just take a selfie on your cell phone. That's not going to be a good quality picture to do what you want to do. So if you need a close-up of your eye, this is why I'm doing this now, so that we actually have a few minutes to run into the studio, grab a camera out of the studio, get as close to your eye as possible and make you feel completely uncomfortable, and then download it so you have a picture. Or come into FlexLab, I'll be happy to take it for you. But take that picture. We need to make sure it's lit well because you've got to be able to do things and add things to it. But then find another 2 to 3 photos of your own that describe something about who you are or what your life is like, whatever. And then you're going to place those images inside your eye. Images, not image. Inside your eye to make it look like a reflection. So you know how often as photographers, if you've ever taken a picture of a person, you can actually see your reflection in their eye depending on the light. It would be like that, like your life is reflecting into your eyes. Use layers, blend modes, whatever mask selection techniques that you have. I just want to see where you're at. And that will help guide me as we go forward, what I might need to hit harder on, what I could probably just breeze over, that kind of stuff. But submit a PSD file. So I need all of your layers. Like I said, 95% of the stuff you submit will have layers. So I need that PSD. But that's what I want you to do for next week. I'm sure I have a couple of samples if I log in to last semester. And I'll get you guys onto the server next week too. I haven't created the folders for this semester yet. Holy cow, they've added instructors. This list keeps getting longer and longer. Let me, chapter 1 assignment. What did Chris do? Oh, yeah, he's like, my outlining was horrible. Don't ever show anybody. So I'm showing it. He did a selection and it caused a little bit of an edge. So it was quite difficult. But there we go. So we've got some reflections right in the eye. Some people added some stuff. What did Lavelle do? He's got several images inside there. I had somebody who put stuff in the whites of their eyes, put one thing in the whites of their eyes, and then put a different thing in the iris of their eyes. So there's several different things you can do, but you're going to want to have at least 2 images in there. So there's actually a picture here. There's a picture here. He's got 3. Picture up here and a picture down here. I don't remember what Drew did. Oh yeah, a city scene. So you want to play around a little bit and just see if you can get the reflection into your eyes. That was the only class I had. Yep. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the one thing to do. That'll be the file that you submit next week. Like I said, we'll have a few minutes if you want me to take that before you leave today. We can do that. Otherwise, FlexLab, or make sure you have a well-lit area and have somebody take that picture of your eye with your camera. The only other thing is to go through chapter 1. So you'll see that some of it is going to be, this chapter is a lot of review, but things like the tools will probably be a section where you might be able to breeze through, or just look for the tools that maybe you're not as familiar with or don't use a lot. But the ones that you use a lot, you're gonna find that part of it to be something you might not even need. But those pages are going to be a review. So I just pulled the pages to go through. So look through those pages and then do that first chapter summary for next week. Like I said, you might find very little that's new in that chapter, but I can guarantee there's going to be something in there. There's the history brush, there's the history palette, there's some of the customizing things in there. I can guarantee you're going to find something in there, but you might not. I don't know. So you'll submit that too. And that's going to be our plan. So next week we're going to hit chapter 2 and start going through some of the things in there in Camera Raw. And that's a 2-week deal because it's so big. So, make sense? All right. Guys are almost too quiet. It's kind of creepy. Let's see if we can change that a little bit. All right. So that's where we'll end it today. But if you want me to take a snapshot of your eye while you're here, we can do that. Otherwise, you are set.